Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is strong, healthy, and happy physically and spiritually. Today is Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Mikeitz. This is Erev Shabbos Parshas Chanakya, Chavtes, Kislev. So, as usual, we have to speak about the connections between Chanakya, the Yom Tov of Chanakya, and Parshas HaShavua, the Parsha of the week, Mikeitz. And first of all, as we know, this is going to be primarily a thought for the festival, connected to a thought for the week. As we know, when Jewish people celebrate a holiday, it's not that we recall events from many, many years ago, but we're actually meant to ponder it, meditate upon it, and gain certain energies and lessons that apply today. So as usual, before we start, we will start with a prayer. And this time we're going to start with a pasuk from Tilim, Kapitel Pei, Pasuk Beis. Roye Yisrael Hazina, Noye Katzoin Yosef, Yoshev Akruvim, Hifiyah. Which means we're talking to Hashem where we say, Roye Yisrael Hazina, Shepherd of Israel. Listen, Hashem is the shepherd. We are his flock. Noye Katzoin Yosef, he who leads Yosef like a flock. And over here, the entire Jewish nation is called Yosef. And we say, Yoshev Akruvim, he who sits atop the Kruvim, Hifiyah should appear. It's talking about the essence of Hashem. In any case, Rashi over here says a tremendous thing on a physical level, but according to Chassidus, obviously on a deeper level. Why is the whole nation called Noye Katzoin Yosef? We're talking about Hashem as the shepherd, and he's leading his flock, which is called Yosef, but referring to the entire Jewish nation. And Rashi says over here, Yosef, Kol Yisrael, Nikroim al Shem Yosef. All of the Yidden are called Yosef, L'fishahu Pinasam V'chilkilam, because he sustained them and provided for them. B'mei harav, in the days of the famine. So as we spoke last week, and today's lesson really is a continuation from last week's, Yosef was unique in that he alone could be in an adverse, hostile environment, completely alien to Judaism and to the right values of our tradition, and still not only survive, but thrive. That's what makes him different than all of his brothers, and even different from the others. As we spoke last week, only a super higher level tzaddik could be the one that didn't have to be disengaged from the world, as the Ovis and the Shvatim had to be shepherds, farmers, separated from society and modern city life. And Yosef could be in Mitzrayim, Eretz Haaretz, a place of decadence and corruption, and nevertheless retain and thrive with his highest level of holiness. And only very few in tzaddikim themselves were able to do this, even from the most righteous. And these are called the Bnei Aliyah. There's very few examples of that sort of type. So that's what we spoke last week. And this pasuk, what it tells us is that since Yosef represents the singular person who was able to accomplish that feat, he is the one who was credited with giving Yidden this special power and ability, this empowerment, that even when we'll be in a city, in a modern life, in a modern world, and still we can remain true and thrive in such circumstances. Spiritually, this we got from Yosef. And that's why the entire nation is called Yosef. So we could say that when Rashi says that Yosef is the one that sustained us in the time of famine, it means also in a spiritual famine. When Yidden are in Golus, he is the prototype, the one that gave us the strength and the sustenance, the spiritual sustenance and fortitude to be able to survive even in a city, even in a life, even in a world which seems totally opposite and in opposition of everything that we stand for. So now that we said this, let's go to Chanukah. We talk about Chanukah. I'm not going to elaborate because I don't like to spend too much time talking about questions in general. But everyone knows the famous questions. What makes the lights of Chanukah, the mitzvah of Chanukah, different than any other mitzvah of all of the other mitzvahs of the Torah? So we see when it comes to kindling, Many discourses of Hasidus discuss when it comes to lights and kindling. We see the Shabbos candles. There were candles that were lit in the menorah in the temple. So only by Chanukah do we see, number one, that it has to be lit mishatishka chama, when it dafka precisely turns dark. So in the darkness, light. We say mezuzahs biyamin, the mezuzah on the right side, but the ner Chanukah, the light of Chanukah, is mismoil. Right always represents the good side, the right side, the correct side, the proper side. Left represents the opposition, what's off. We say al Pesach beisay mibachotz. Shabbos candles we light in the home. It brings peace and prosperity for the home. Over here we're saying, what are the candles for? They're outside. And we say, ad dekali ragla tamidoi, it was meant to be till a certain tribes people that were vendors, and they stayed out late. But Chassidus has an interpretation, as we'll soon see. These are all facts that are related to the candle lighting and to no other lighting mitzvah. In the Beis HaMikdash, there was a time where Plag Mincha, it wasn't darkness, and over there also it's connected to Yamin. I don't want to get into the details. Now, another very interesting fact, that most of the time we don't realize it when we're children, but when we get older we realize it, and we realize how phenomenal it is. What are we celebrating Chanukah? A miracle that happened with the menorah in the temple. How many branches were the menorah in the temple? Only 7. Here, when we have the mitzvah of Chanukah, we invented a new menorah, an 8-branch menorah, which never existed before. So here the sages came along in order to commemorate the miracle of 8 nights, that the oil lasted for 8 days. We invented a new menorah. So you could ask a question, why do we do this? It seems a bit problematic. It could be confusing. We're commemorating a miracle that happened with the menorah that was in the temple. And that menorah is 7 branches. And now we make a new invention. We make a candelabra of 8 branches, a menorah of 8. Why? To commemorate a miracle that happened in 8 days. Maybe we could have done something else. Kept the menorah that was 7 branches and done something else. I don't know. To commemorate 8 days. But to make a new menorah, one that's 8 branches. And therein lies the whole story. And in general, there's so much to talk about Chanukah. So we're going to remain focused on this idea of the main mitzvah of Chanukah is the mitzvah of kindling the lights. So today, we're going to talk about light. And what makes the mitzvah of Chanukah different than every other mitzvah of the entire Torah. So first, let's talk about light. There's a very interesting mimer of the Rebbe, a Hasidic discourse, which is a one-of-a-kind discourse. We once mentioned it before, and that's a mimer called Keit Som L'Choshech. It's a mimer that talks about different levels of light. But at the beginning of the mimer, he says something so fascinating, so fundamental, and it applies and could apply maybe to Chanukah. He says that in general, revelation and spirituality comes through light. And we know that all revelation comes through the Torah. And Torah is called Torah Oyer. Torah Oyer. Torah is compared to a light. So here we see that the bittul, the ending of the darkness of exile, will come through light, the light of the Torah. So therefore the Rebbe says, in order to bring closer the redemption, Mashiach, it's about learning about the subject of light. That means in addition to the fact that the whole Torah is called light, but if we will talk about the subject of light in Torah itself, so we will make even the Mashiach closer. And that's what he says. To bring the Geula even closer, it's through learning in Torah about light. So maybe we could say the same thing over here. This in itself, that Chanukah is a yontif, that it's all about kindling light. That means it's connected to Mashiach and brings Mashiach closer than any other mitzvah. Because this is a yontif, which the main mitzvah is light. No other mitzvah is the main, no other yontif is the main mitzvah, the light and the kindling of lights. Now, to understand what makes the mitzvah of Chanukah different than every other mitzvah, This is based on a Sikha of the Rebbe in Chelik Hey of the Likutei Sichos. And over there he says a phenomenal thing. And that is, in general, there are two types of mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah asay, a positive commandment, and there's a mitzvah lois asay, a negative commandment. Now, this is one of the discussions of Torah Chassidus, which go on and on. We have sometimes these discussions. What's greater, Torah or Yisrael, the Torah or the Jews? What's greater, tzaddikim or Bali Tshuva? What's greater, mitzvahs hasay, the positive commandments, or mitzvahs lois hasay, the negative commandments? So now is not the scope of this talk to be able to come to any great conclusions, but we're going to talk about it just a bit. So usually we say, sometimes we say that mitzvah say is greater because mitzvah say is the actual business of transforming the world. You take an object of this world and you do a mitzvah with it, so you're changing the world. So the business of actually changing the world, making over the world, comes primarily through the positive commandments. But sometimes it's explained that the negative commandment, so in other words, sometimes we explain what's a negative commandment. We're preventing godly forces, godly energy to be going in wrong places. That's what it means. When we keep the negative commandments, like we do not eat something which is not kosher, we're preventing the negative side from getting energy. But that's not all. Sometimes Chassidus comes along and explains that the mitzvahs lois also is dealing with a greater level of light. Why? And this is explained al pi Kabbalah, that Zocher v'shomer. It says about Shabbos, Zocher means you remember Shabbos. That's through making Kiddush, through the prayers of Shabbos. That's the mitzvah hasay, the positive commandment connected to Shabbos. Shomer, keeping Shabbos, means preventing from doing any work. And Chassidus brings from Kabbalah that says Zocher is connected to Vavkei, the two last letters of Hashem's name, and Shomer is connected to Yudkei, the first two letters of Hashem's name. And the Yudkei is higher than the Vavkei. But what's the explanation? How is it, in other words, that the negative commandment is connected to a higher light? And why? There are some examples for this, and the point is that usually a light which could be contained and mislabish, enclothe itself in an act, in a physical act that we're doing, is a lower level of light. In other words, it's a mitzumtzum, a contracted light, a smaller light that a vessel could contain it. That's why it could become contained. So in other words, let's say we're talking about tefillin, and I have black boxes, and I put on tefillin, and I'm wrapping the tefillin around my arms. So a mitzvah asay, a proactive mitzvah, a positive commandment means you do a physical act, and in that physical act that you're doing, the light becomes enclosed. The light can be contained. What does it mean when we're doing a mitzvah lois asay? What does it mean when we do a negative act? It means that we're dealing with such a light, it cannot be contained in a vessel. The only way we access it, the only way we reach it, is through non-action, through non-activity. In other words, like by being transparent. In other words, we can't take it durch the yeh, nor durch the nit. We can't take it through something which represents our achievements, our existence. We have to become invisible. We make way for the big wave. When we have an infinite level of light, by withholding, by non-action, by making space for the infinity, then there the infinity resides. And then there the infinity comes. So therefore, a mitzvah hasay, a positive commandment, which represents an action, a production from something limited, contains a limited light. The light actually comes down into the act, and therefore the act has a certain holiness in it. But a mitzvah lois asay, we can't really have an act which contains it, so therefore the only way that we bring down and we access this light is through non-action. But from this comes out another difference, that a mitzvah hasay, a positive commandment, is involved with what's called klipas noiga. Klipas noiga is a lower level, in other words, a better level of worldly things, the permissible. So the permissible objects can be taken, a kosher animal could be slaughtered and eaten, so we elevate this animal, or we take a palm branch tree and we use it for a lulav. So we take something of this world and we use it for a mitzvah. We elevated what's called the klipas noga, the thinner shell, the thinner obstruction, the more mild-mannered opposition, so to speak. But then there's something called sholish klippus hatmeis, that's a greater opposition, somebody which seems like the total polar opposite. We say when it comes to the polar opposite, we can't really use kiruv, we can't really use engagement by engaging with it and being able to elevate it, because it's sholish klippus hatmeis. It's the total opposite. And such a thing we say usually cannot be nizbarer, it can't be elevated, it has to be dichui, it has to be crushed. Only by crushing it, by disengagement, by ignoring, by dichui, then that's how we get rid of that opposition, and that's the way it works. And this rule is 99% of the time, that when it comes to klippas noiga, those things that are kosher, so to speak, permissible, more of the mild-mannered opposition, it's through kiruv, engagement, elevate, and refine. When it comes to certain other things of the world, the only way is through dichui, disengagement, ignoring, and through that, getting rid of them. Like the famous expression, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Similar like that. Over here comes along, and there's many examples where we see this idea that sometimes something which it might be considered a lower level of holiness, but it's actually a higher level. But the higher level is connected to the level which cannot be enclosed. I think we once spoke about it, and really it should be a whole nother lesson. But just to give one example, we say about talis and tzitzis. According to halacha nigla, the tzitzis on the talis, the fringes, the strings, they are halachically on a higher level. They have to be treated a certain way. But the garment, the talis godel, without the tzitzis, that's on a lower level, doesn't have the same holiness as the tzitzis. But Kabbalah says that the talis, which you wrap yourself around, is actually a higher level. It goes on makifim. That's the infinite light. And the strings, the fringes, that's a more limited light. But therefore, that is the same exact explanation. In other words, why is it that the tzitzis have more holiness? Because the level that the tzitzis, the strings are connected to, is such a level that could actually be enclosed in those strings. Because it's a lower level. So the lower level of holiness, like so to speak, animates those strings. And the strings themselves reach a level of holiness. But when we're talking about the level of holiness that's connected to the talis, it's such a higher level, it can never be enclosed in the garment. So the best thing we could say about it is this is what the garment represents, this is what the garment signifies, this is what the garment, the talis, is a symbol of. But we don't say that the actual Oyer HaMakif, that Soiviv Kol Alma, these are very high Kabbalistic levels of God, they can't actually become enclosed in the garment because then they're a higher level from being able to become enclosed. And that's what's usually said about the mitzvahs loisesei. We're dealing with a higher level of light, and therefore they cannot be contained in boxes or into a physical act or anything of our making, of our doing. And how do we access it? Through non-doing. Now here comes along the accomplishment of the mitzvah of the Rabbanan, and it's a whole other explanation how it's connected to a mitzvah that the sages ordained. Over here we have the one mitzvah sasei, so to speak. It's an action. And we say that where does this action reach? It reaches the domain of the most furthest levels of darkness. In the deepest darkness of the night. And in the furthest regions away from godliness. And this is what's expressed in every single aspect of the mitzvah of Chanukah. Mishatishka Chama, when it turns dark, the only light that we light, which is meant to be lit when it's dark. And the same thing is Al Pesach Beisei Mi Bachutz, out there. And the same thing is where we say Mismoil, we're the only one dealing with the left, with the Smoil, the opposition. We're not going to get into the other thing of Kal Yiragel Tamardoy, it's too late, too much time. But in any case, so over here, this is the uniqueness and the specialty of mitzvahs neiros Chanukah, which does not exist by any other mitzvah sasei, that this is a mitzvah sasei, so to speak, that has the advantage also of a loy sasei. We're dealing with the deepest, darkest, lowest level, similar to sholish klippus hatmeis, and over here, the operative word is not shvira, not destruction, but bitter, refinement. Because we're working with light. And we're dealing with the most powerful light. And this answers every single question and everything that's related to Chanukah. That's why we made the candle with 8. 8 represents infinity. There's a cycle, there's the perfection of the cycle, and then there's that which transcends the cycle. 8 represents infinity, as is known also according to Kabbalah and Chassidus. And the same thing is every single aspect. That's why we made the menorah of 8 branches. To bring out this very point. Because if we made a menorah with 7 branches, then that means we're dealing with the same light that was in the Beis HaMikdash. Hello, my friends. The light that we light by Chanukah is greater than the light that was in the Beis HaMikdash. Because this is the light that illuminates even the darkness of Golus. The Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, and we still have the mitzvah of Chanukah. And this is alluded to in a famous Ramban, that he learns that when the Eibishter told Aaron, what you are doing is greater than what all the other princes of the tribes are doing. It's because, not because he was going to kindle the menorah every day in the Beis HaMikdash, but because the idea of lights, menorah, is going to be eternal, even in the time of Golus. So the thing that Aaron was associated with, that he kindled the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash every single day, how does that have eternity? Only through us lighting the Chanukah menorah in exile. In the year 2021, Tafshin Pei Beis, we have the 8-branch menorah, because only that infinite light could permeate even the worst exile that could happen. The light that's in the Beis HaMikdash is good for a Beis HaMikdash. It's not powerful enough to permeate the darkness of exile. And the light of the Chanukah menorah is even more powerful. It goes lower. It permeates even the darkness of exile. And that's why the light of Chanukah is connected to Mashiach more than anything else, because of its eternity. And therefore, when you think about it, the mitzvah of Chanukah, like I said, that the sages invented a new sort of menorah, is phenomenal. It's actually astounding. It's unbelievable. And this is the famous rule that we said many times. The deeper the darkness, the greater the darkness. We need a greater light that can permeate even that darkness. And that represents the light of Chanukah. The lights of Chanukah are the highest level of light. Similar to what we spoke last week about Yosef, that he's the only one that can be in such a place, like Mitzrayim, and still remain holy. Now we come to this week's Parsha. There's such a phenomenal connection. Unbelievable. And that is, that after Yosef interprets Pari's dreams, it says that what does Pari do? He makes him a viceroy, and then he gives him a new name. And what's that name? Tzafnas Panayach. And what does Rashi say? What does it mean, Tzafnas Panayach? Meforish hatzvainis. They translate it as discerns the cryptic. And the ein lefaneach dimyan b'mikra. Rashi says there's no word. It's an unparalleled word. There's no other word like it in the entire Mikra. So this is astonishing, what Rashi says over here, and what it means. The simple meaning of Mefarish Tzfunas, the one who discerns the cryptic, means that he was able to interpret the dreams which no one else was able to interpret. But obviously the real meaning is, what's Yosef? Yosef HaTzadik is like the Neiros Chanukah. It's the light that will reveal whatever's hidden. It's the most powerful light that will reveal the most deepest secrets. What's covered with the greatest darkness. And that's what it means. Rashi says it's unparalleled. There's nothing like it. Yosef's level is unparalleled. He's absolutely unique. There's nothing like it. And over here, as usual, the Baal HaTurim, as we spoke last week's Baal HaTurim, we're going to get back to it. But first on these words, Tzafnas Panayach, he said, Begematria Megala Misutarim, which means the revealer of things that have been hidden. Sparks, godly sparks, nitzoitzos, that have been hidden in the greatest cover-up, in the greatest mud, in the greatest cement, buried. Still, if we have Tzafnas Panayach, it will reveal the spark that's even there. That's what it means, Tzafnas Panayach. Last week, I mentioned the Baal HaTurim on the words Zekunim. Like Yosef was born to Yaakov, And it says, B'gematria Roz. We said Gematria Roz, the word Zekunim is equal to the word Roz, which is 207. And it says that he gave him the secrets of the Torah. Roz means secrets. And we said B'gematria Zer means a crown. And the Baal Turim says whatever he says. And we said crown because it's connected to Keser, which is a higher level. And now let's get back to this week's Parsha. Guess what? There's another Gematria to the word Roz. Hold on, you ready for this? The word Roz is also Oyer, light. And that's a Hayom Yom, which tells us the whole story. The Hayom Yom of Vov Elul says as following. The Tzemach Tzedek said that the Baal Shem Tov loved light. And he said, Oyer b'gematria Roz. The word Oyer equals Roz, secret. Der was weiß dem Soid, was in jeder Sach kann lichtig machen. A person who knows the secret within any entity can diffuse light. This is so amazing. That means, this is really in general the approach of Chassidus. That means we bring light, Oyer. But what does Oyer mean? Oyer means to see what's hidden there, to reveal what's hidden there, to always see the redemptive angle, to see the spark. When you know the true definition of something, when you bring light, then you will reveal the spark. And the greater the light will always, the greater the Oyer, the greater the Roz, the greater the Roz, the greater the light. The more we learn Chassidus, the more we're attached to Chassidus, the more we're attached to the secrets of the Torah, we have a greater, more powerful light. And you can be a Tzafnas Panayach, the discerner of the cryptic. Whatever seems as a concealment, as a question, as a problem, becomes a solution, becomes a benefit, becomes goodness. Now, one lesson we could take from this in general, to connect us to Yosef HaTzadik in a practical way in Chanukah, I think we could say, it says in the Pasuk that, what do we see about Yosef? In last week's parsha it says, Vayara doinev ki Hashem itay. Potiphar saw Hashem was with him. And why? And what does Rashi say over there? Koshem shemayim shoga b'fiv. We have to learn how to say, Baruch Hashem, thank you Hashem, Emir Hashem. Say that. And it goes together. The more someone says, Baruch Hashem, Geleit Reibish, to thank God, then the more you'll be successful. And again, in this week's parsha, right when Paroi promotes him and makes him the viceroy, what does Paroi say in Mikeitz? Vayemer Paroi el avodav, hanimtza kazeh ish. Do we find anyone like him? Asher ruach elikim boi. The Spirit of God is within him. So by Yosef it was obvious because he's able to perform wonders. He's a Tzafnas Panayach. But I think for us the lesson starts from the bottom up. Let's start with the simple thing. Let's work on ourselves to have Shem, Shemayim, Shoga B'fiv. Train ourselves to say Baruch Hashem, Geleibt Hashem, thank you Hashem. So the more we'll do that, that will be something that if we look at you, we see Ish El Aruach Elikim Boy. The Rebbe says in a Maimer of Chanukah, Tovshan Lamed Ches, he says something I don't know if he says anywhere else. When he's talking about the Mesiras Nefesh of Chanukah, he says, we look at this person, we see he's a Mesiras Nefesh Jew, a Mesiras Nefeshid. Same thing, just like we look at you and we see that Shem Shemayim Shog B'fiv, we look at you and we see a person who has his principles, who believes in his principles, and that Yiddishkeit is strong and healthy by you. We'll finish off with a famous story that everyone knows, that the Tzemach Tzedek was once told that his grandfather, I'm going to say it very briefly, his grandfather was given a gift, a snuff box, like the people used to take tobacco, ground tobacco, and smell it. So they'd sniff it, and it would revive them. So the Tzemach Tzedek, the grandson of the Alter Rebbe, was told that his grandfather was given a gift, a silver sniff box, and he broke off the cover, and he used the cover as a mirror to see if his tefillin was straight. So when the grandson was told that his grandfather did this, the grandson of Tzemach Tzedek said, it can't be! Because mein Zayden's Inyan is nicht gewend zu brechen. Because my grandfather's thing was never to break. Mistame, probably there was some sort of small screw or pin that kept the lid connected to the box. He didn't break off the lid, he removed the pin. and then he used the lid to see as a mirror if his tefillin was straight. So what's amazing about the story is that the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the grandson, never heard the story before. But when he heard the story, and the way the story was told to him was that his grandfather broke off the lid, he said, it's impossible, because my grandfather would never break. And that's the way of Chassidus, and the real way of Torah. We don't break anything. The way is not through Shvira. And this is the main lesson of the lights of Chanukah. We reach the level where even with the greatest darkness and the lowest things, the real ultimate accomplishment, the real idea of Mashiach, and the most infinite light works and operates in a manner of birur, refinement, elevation, and not shvira, not breaking. And that's why the Tzemach Tzedek could say, my grandfather would never break, because that wasn't his way. This is not the way of Chassidus. And the Eibusher should help that through our lighting the candles of Chanukah and bringing this infinite light, and through our connecting ourselves and going in the ways of Yosef HaTzadik, Shem Shemayim Shoga B'fiv, we're going to work on ourselves to say Baruch Hashem more and more. This will definitely bring about the Geula, our Mikeitz Vashlema, take you from Yad Mamish. Good Shabbos, happy Chanukah, wishing you lots and lots of Chanukah guilt with all interpretations, and Mashiach now. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.